Masech Zevachim, Dav Samach Tes Hamrel. We're starting with Samach Ches on the base, 15 lines from the bottom. The line starting with the word Veloi. Till now, you might explain that we cannot learn out that Malika by Yazar should help. Just like Shechita, we find that it can be done by Yazar, so too Malika by a non-Kayin should help. So the Gemara said that you can't compare to Shechita because Shechita is not part of the Aveda. And the Gemara said, we find that by Paru Aduma that it could not be done by Azar, so it shows you that it was part of the Aveda, it had to be done by Elazar Koyin. So obviously it is part of the Aveda. So the Gemara said there it's different. Paru Aduma is part of Kachem Bedek Abayis. But normally, Shechita is not part of the Aveda. There was part of the Kachem Bedek Abayis. That's why, and it's no raya that it's part of the Aveda. And we can only learn out Malika, which is a Aveda. You want to learn out that you help by Azar from Shechita. But Shechita is not part of the Aveda. And your raya from Paradum is Nishkenai because it's part of Kachem Bedek Abayis. Says, you're making the kasha even stronger. But loy. Kol dechenu. This is a kavachena. Mother, kachem bedek abayis. Bayi koda. Mother, by kachem bedek abayis. You needed a koyin, dafka koyin, to do the shechita. Dafka loza koyin. Kachem mizbeich mebaya. So kachem mizbeich for sure. You should need a koyin, and nevertheless you allowed azar. So therefore we should allow melika, but through azar. After the Gemara, I'm gonna have sheisha, but hey, havidi elamidi they have amaras negoyim. Says Rav Sheisha, this that the Torah required by Shchitas Paru Aduma is not because it's Aveda, only because it's just like Maris Nagayim, the Lav Aveda Yubokona, even though it's not Aveda, nevertheless, by Maris Nagayim, a person will not become Tomei B'Tumas Nega, or Torah from Tumas Nega, only if it's a Kayin, not to great, even if there are greater Talmidei Chachamim than this Kayin, the Talmud Chacham cannot be matir. So just like the Torah required mitzad exeris hakosuf that Dafka Kohen has to do it, so too by Shchitas Paru Aduma it can only be done through a Kohen. So you can't learn out from there any kavachema there. It's exeris hakosuf by Kachem Bedek Abayis by Paru Aduma that it requires a Kohen. Let us learn out from Bama that Malika's Zar should help. And it should be metayr from the Beis Habliya. How? Because since by Abama Azar could be makir l'chatchila, even a carbon. So it's even in the Beis Hamikdash where Azar is possible in Malika. You're right. It is possible in Malika the Beis Hamikdash, but the Malika should help at least by the Eved that if they put the seif on the Zvayach lo yeded, you wouldn't take it down. So too it should be time medin in the Vela. Says you want to be Bama lo Yolef. We cannot learn it out from Bama. The Avedis of the Migdash from Avedis Bama you can't because the Bama is considered as Chayil legabe the Beis Hamikdash. Zog the Gemara Belai. We don't learn out Migdash from Bama. Well, Tanya, we learned to finish Navaraisim Menayin. How do we know Le Yoitze? It's something that became possible because it was taken outside the Azara. Like the Emur Kabbanis, the fats of the Kabbanis, or the limb of the oila, they become possible by taking it outside of the Azara. From where do we know Shim Allah Layeda that if you put it on the Mizbeich already, you don't take it down? It says Yimanam Kosharei. We find Yoitze Kasha by Bama, that Yoitze is Kasha L'Chatchila by Bama. By a Bama's Yachid, there was Kasha even in the field, on the rocks, like we find Bamanayach that he was Makriv on the cellar. That's in Shaftim. So anyone who sacrifices there is in the Geder of, meaning in the fields or on this land, is in the Geder of going out of the Azara because there were no mechitzes that should be considered as befnim. And since we found that Yoitze was kosher l'chatchila, so too the Migdash, which is takapasul, if you took it out of the Azara, but if at least by the evidence, if he went out of his Mizbeach, lo yed it. So we learn out Bama from Migdash. We learn out from Bama that whatever was kosher lechatchila by bama, even though it's possible mikdash, but by the evidence, if it went on the mizbeach, lo yeret. So you see, you do learn out from bama. Says Gemara Tana, the Tana never learned it out from bama. Really, it was a limit from the word Zeis Teres Ha'ila. That the word Zeis, the Torah is Maba, one Torah for anything that went on the Mizbeach, even Psulin, that if they went on the Mizbeach, lo yeret. Bezeis, Torah, Bezeis is a miyut. That only specific Psulin, which kind of Psulin? Something that the Kedusha was Chal and then became Pasul. But something that was Pasul Lechatchila, Im Allah yeret. The only things that Im Allah lo yeret is something that was kosher lechatchila, then became pasul. Or even the small, and if he did it with the left hand, the malika, or he did it by Laila, these things we find by different avedis in the Beis Hamikdash, so therefore it was chal, the kedusha, but it was done in the wrong way, and that's how it became pasul. That's the one that lo yeded. But something that's lechatchila, not the kedusha wasn't chal lechatchila, in such a case, the halacha would be like a zar that will do melika is lechatchila not even avoid, it's not even chal, and therefore yeded. Rabbi Yochanan says by melika zar ain't metam habeis habliya. Rabbi Yochanan argues and he says that the melika of zar is not metam habeis habliya, and sakin. But if he uses a knife, metam habeis habliya. A knife is because the only way to do the melika way with a knife is to boring, is chalada, that's possible, or drisa, sakin is possible. So that's why sakin will be possible, but he argues with the first Tana, and he says that azar, the halacha is that azar is not metame beis habliya. So the Gemara Tanam, we learned the Mishnah, the Gemara now brings that right. Rabbi Yochanan, kol hapsulin shabak b'likasim psula. All the psulim of Melika, that Melika was done, the process of Melika is psula, bishleima, Rabbi Yochanan, that the Mishnah said the word kol, le'asu yezar, comes to include. The kol is coming to even include what kind of psul, that if Azar did the Melika, that the Eif won't be B'tam Beis Habliya. Elo Rav, but according to Rav, that if Azar did the Melika, it is B'tam Beis Habliya. Kol lahasuya. What does the word kol come to include? Lav lahasuya. Is it then not? According to Rav, that Melika through a kohen smell v'layla. If he did it with his left hand or by night, but not zoyer shamalak, but not a zoyer that was malak. That's what the Gemara is saying. That's what kol is come to include. That if the not that a zoyer that's malika, it's not metam beis habliya. Rather, he's come to tell you that but even if he did it with the left hand or he did it by night, that's where if Allah lo yeded, and it's not going to be metam beis habliya. But azar shamalak is, says Gemara, that's what he's coming to teach us. That if he did it with the left hand or by night, to smell the layla, we had to get on. We learned the Fedish in the Hemshch of the Mishnah. We don't need the Reisha to include that. And the Gemara Tani we had the Mefarish. Betchila, when he learned it in a klolistic way. That the Amalikas psules that are not metams beis habliya, but with the word kol, he learned it in a general term, but he didn't specify. And then he specifies which are the psulim that he was referring to small and lighter. And says, Gemara, I'll bring you another raya from the Mishnah. Tashma, this is the rule. Kol, anything that was psul b'kodesh, so beis habliya, that b'chlal, if it was an avela, when he took it, the oif in the beis habliya, it would be metame begodim also. And here it says, kol shayib psul b'kodesh, something that was first, the kedusha was chal, and then became pasul. So in such a case, it's not going to be metame beis habliya. It says, you want to be shlam Rabbi Yochanan. It's understood according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that a zar who does malika, it's also not going to be metame beis habliya. Lasu yazar, it comes to include a zar, the kol. It's coming to be include that a zar that did malika. It's not going to be metame beis habliya. Rav that says a zar is tamei. if he does it, it is tam basically. What is the kol coming to include? Says Gemara, even according to you, what you're asking Rav from the Rebbe of kol, I can ask you on Rabbi Yechnem. What it says in the Sefer of the Mishnah, it says Shaloi Hoya Psula B'Kodesh Metame Beis Habliya, that the Psula B'Kodesh was not Metame Beis Habliya. So there it says kol. What is he coming to include? The kol Shapsula B'Kodesh is, if you answer this case, you will answer the kol Shapsula B'Kodesh. Well, first, let's understand Shaloi Hoya Psula B'Kodesh. What is that coming? What is that? What is the word kol there coming to include? Ella, you're saying the kol of the Reisha is coming to tell us something else, to include that what? Shapsula b'kodesh, anyway, tam beis habli la'asuye, what is it coming to include? Shchitas, if somebody, instead of doing melika, he did shchitas of kach b'fnim. Instead of doing the melika, he did a shchita. To tell us, even though he did a shchita, b'bakan melika, that it's not going to be metam beis habli, even though it's possible, because our cup meif is not kosher, only with melika. But this thing wasn't learned by Fedish. And now, what is the call of the Sefer? Kol shaloi hoyop sulabak kodesh le'asuyei. The call, what is the shaloi hoyop sulabak kodesh coming to include? Le'asuyei is coming to include melikas chulin b'chutz. That if he did a melika of chulin, that outside the azara, that's not even aveda. So it's matama beis habliya. And this too wasn't learned in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara brings Haraya as Haraya to Rabbi Yochanan. Tanya Kavah say Rabbi Yochanan learned to have Haraya like Rabbi Yochanan. Melaka Zar, if a Zar did the Melika of the Eif, or Melaka Puzzle, or a Kayan who had a Mum did the Melika, and Pigul, a Kam Eif that the Kayan had in mind, Shas Melika, to eat it more than a lot of time, even though it became Noisa and it became Tameh after Melicha, it's not Metame Beis Habliya. So you see, the Melika, even by Pigul, because the only way it could become Pigul if the whole Aveda was Chal. He did, and only after that, if the whole Aveda was done right, then at the end of the Aveda, we say what he had in mind, the Shas Melika, then it becomes Pigul. Like we said in the Gemara before, from this that it says by Pigul Lo Yedatza, that means it has to be just like Hatzos Kosher, that's how the Hatzos Psul has to be, meaning the whole Aveda had to be 100%, and just that there was the Machshavas Pigul. And Noisa and Tamei came after the Melika, and the Aveda was Kosher, and then he left it to become Noisa or became Tamei. So they did fulfill something, therefore it's not Matam Beis Habliya. But something that L'chatchila has no purpose, like Mlichis Chulin, Bachutz, that has zero purpose, of course that's going to be Matama. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Shemaiti Shtayim. I heard two halachas b'negeya to a Zor. Achas, if the Zor does Kmitza meaning Kmitza Zor, Achas Malika Zor. But Achas Tered, Achas Leit Tered. But I don't know which one. I learned two halachas b'negeya to Azar doing Vaida of a Kayin, either the Kmitza, one halacha b'negeya Kmitza, and one halacha b'negeya Azar doing the Malika. One halacha again b'negeya to Azar doing the Kmitza, and one halacha b'negeya Azar doing the Kmitza, and one halacha b'negeya Azar doing the Malika. But one we learned that Tated, and one we learned late Tated. Meaning that if one on Mizbeach, you don't take it down, or if one on Mizbeach you do, I don't know which one is which. It's reasonable to say, Kmitza, that the Zar who did the Kmitza, Tated, that one comes down. Malika, but if Azar did the Malika, it doesn't come down. In fact, one of my Mishnah. What's the difference? Why by Malika you say Loi Tated, and by the Kmitza you'll say Tated? You're going to say Malika, the Yashba Bebama, because Malika Zar is Ksheder L'Chatchila by a Bama, the Aveda by a Bama doesn't need a Kayin. So therefore, even in the Mikdash, even though Malika Zar is Psula, but B'diavad loy teira. Says the Gemara, Kmitza nami yeshma b'bama. We find Kmitza was also done by the bama. So even and it was lechatchila good by a bama. So why b'diavad, even though it's possible to to do Kmitza, but b'diavad if he did it, why we should say if it went up on the mizbeach. Why do we say teira? It should be loy teira. Chita making the say mincha b'bama, that there was no mincha by a bama. Mameina, you can't say that a zah was kash lahakol lechatchila mincha by bama. Says the Gemara, if so, Einayf is not b'bama. There was no din of Vegas by bama. Damer Rav Sheshes. For Rav Sheshes that said, according to the Mani Amma that says there was mincha by a bama, the Tanakam of the Mishnah over there, and that the Tanakama, it's in, I think it's in Mecheres. Anyway, of the Mishnah, yes, but come Eifes b'bama. The one that says there's mincha b'bama, there was din avevis b'bama. Mincha, and according to Mani Amma that said there was no mincha by bama, ain't avevis. There was no avevis by bama. My time, what's the reason? One is dependent on the other, because we learned out before Matan Torah. There it says the pasuk v'yizbechu v'zavchu zivchei shlom Hashem Isam. So it says Zevachim. Maybe I brought the. I'm sorry. L'man Asher yavi b'nei Yisrael zevchim Asher hem zevchim al pnei hasoda. So you see Zevachim. It says lashon Zevachim, which is kabanas behema, v'loy menachis, to exclude and not menachis. Zevachim meaning a behema, v'loy eifes. So since you can't be mechal between mincha and eifes, but again the kashas of that bama. That was that we were talking from. That was in Moshe Rabbeinu's time before Matan Torah. That's why, if one wasn't there, the miyut it goes automatically on both. So why did Chizkiah make a chilik when it's by Kmitza? If it went on the mizbeach Torah, then by Malika not. Alaima says Gemara. The reason why Chizkiah was mechalik by Kmitza, he says, "Ein kiddush b'kli shadas, but b'mincha b'bama." Since they didn't have the avodah, part of the avodah of having a kli shadas by bama, so therefore it's not even a comparison. You can't compare mikdash to bama, since the kiddush b'kli shadas added in the kiddush of the mincha, and that's a siba. If you don't have that, it's puzzle. And you can't learn out that it was mutter by Bama because Bama was missing the main component of Kli Sharis. So it's not even a dimyan. Says the Mishnah, we learned in the Mishnah Malach, if he did Malika with his left hand, or he did it by night, it's not the Thomas but Beis Abliya. Rabbanan learned Yachtei Malika, she lefnim. I would have thought if he did Malika, meaning the Malika Psula, like he did with one of the ones that we said, with let's say he did it with the left hand, she lefnim inside the Azar Matama Begadim with Beis Abliya is Matama the Begadim and the Beis Abliya, meaning if it was considered as an avela. An avela, once it hits the base of it's not only matama the person, it's matama the begadim as well. Zog, you want to talmud leima, it's nevela, because it says the word nevela. The chol nefesh nevela utreifa be'ezer who gave a chibis begadim v'rachos b'amayim. That's the pasuk to exclude that a malika psula, that it won't have a din nevela and it won't be matama. So the Rabbanan learned. I would have thought malika yachatei malika psulin. I'm repeating again. Tani Rabbanan yachatei malika shel psulin. Shehi lefnim will be matama begadim beis habliya. I would have thought that it will be matama beis habliya. Tamalei nevela. The din only if it's a nevela. But mayit to exclude malika psula doesn't have the din of nevela, and it will not be matama. In fact, what are you talking about? Hanami, maybe this malika, which is psula, is included nevelahi, How does the Tana know that it's memayit if there was a psul in the, but if the a psul in the malika, it's still going to be, it's not going to be nevela? Says Gemara alatamid lema treifa. Says Gemara because it says in the pasuk both. What do you have to say both words? This word is extra in the word treifa. To tell you that an order that an oiv should become a tamei b'din nevela, it has to be a misa without shchita, a misa without malika. Ma treifa shei ma teres isa. Just like by treifa, it doesn't become mutter because when it became when it was a treifa, it doesn't become. If that isa was there before it, it's not going to help. Of course, so too in the Veil Sa'if that the Torah says it's Matama Beis Abliya, Shei Matel says it's talking about in a case, well, there was no way that the Shechita would help. Yatsa Malika Shei Lefnim, excluding a Malika which was inside the Hazara, Hayil Vehi Matel Sa'isa, since it is Mata de Iser, Bechlal, when you do Malika is Mata Iser, but if it was a nevela first, it would never be mated, or a treif, it would never be mated. But here we're talking about it would have been mated the iser, even when the carbon is possible. Shekol man that the carbon is alive, even if it went on the mizbeach, and it's now not royal akravi because of the soul. The melika was mated al kapanim that if you put it up on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. And therefore it's not either going to be metame begadim bebeis habliya, meaning the person who swallows it, he doesn't become tamei and his begadim don't become tamei. Hevi, and the hekesh that we learned to include tumas nevela hamelik, and we're going to learn many cases. Kach machutz, these are the names of the cases of that we learn out. The hekesh. Maybe b'fnim ben machutz, hayo ve'ein malikis matidim es ha'isa, since these malikis are not mated the isa, so even if they went up on the mizbeach, they would take it down. Mitamim bigadim abeis habliya. The bigadim become tamei when he swallows it, bebeis habliya, and he becomes tamei as well. The Gemara brings another raisa. That from that pasuk we learn an additional din. Tanya idach we learn another brayse. Yach peishchitas chulin lefnim. I would have thought shechting a bird of a chulin, inside the azara v'chein kachim beimefnim beimachutz. So too kachim if he shechted the bird, whether it was bifnim or bachutz, metama beis b'liya should become tamei because the malika is the only thing that's mateh. That's the avodah for Eiv. Talmud Leiman nevela comes to the pasuk and tells us nevela to exclude those that were slaughtered is not going to have a din of tumah, not a din of nevela. In fact, the Gemara Hanami, maybe this Eiv that was slaughtered instead of malika, or by kachim bein befnim shenishcha bein befnim bein machutz nevela. Maybe this oiv chulin that was slaughtered b'fnim, which automatically becomes possible, or oiv kachin that was slaughtered instead of being malika, having malika, b'fnim b'chutz neveli. How do you know it excludes malika or shchita from making it a nevela? Ella, we have to say, we have Talmud Lema treifa. The word treifa is extra. To be makish, to compare nevela to treifa. Only nevela so oiv, which is like a treifa, it's going to be matama. Ma treifa shava b'fnim b'chutz. Just like treifa, the din of b'fnim is like b'chutz. In both places it's aser. Af kol, so too, the death of oifis that make them nevelas has to be shavis b'fnim b'chutz. The din has to be equal inside like outside. Yatse excluding shchitas chulin b'fnim. Shachting a eif inside the hazara, kachim ben mefnim ben machutz, shahev lo yishavu befnim kibachutz. Since they're not, that din is not equal befnim kibachutz. So since it's not, ein metam begadim abeis habliya, then the din will not be metam the begadim abeis habliya. What does it mean? It's not equal bifnim kibachutz. So we're going to go into it soon, right now. Bishleina chulin says Gemara, it's understood chulin that was slaughtered. Lo shavu, the din of bifnim is not kibachutz, because chulin that was slaughtered outside the hazara are kosher. But if they're slaughtered inside the Hazara, they're asur. Ella kachim, but kachim, either. Whether it was slaughtered by chutz, whether it was slaughtered by fnim, since there was a shechita instead of malika, psilaninu. They're apostle. So there, the din is equal, you have bifnim, is kibachutz. Rava said, so I understand, so that's the kasha. So the Gemara is saying, I understand chulin, I've been against the shechita, but kachim, that the pnim is kibachutz, that it has to be b'malika. So Rava explains the market, the shechitas eif of kachim b'chutz, of eif kachim that was slaughtered by chutz metares from the dinim of nevela is not from the dasha of the brayse, only it's from a svara. How? Im hayu shchitas chutz lechayvei, if the shchita of slaughtering a eif of kachim outside the azara helps that the sheikhat should be chayv kares because of shchuti chutz loisayolai. You have to say he did a vagika aveda, something that's effective, but he did it in the wrong place. That's why he's chayiv kares. But it had to be something effective. So for sure it should help to be matam din avela. Since it has the weight to be mechayiv him as a shchuti chutz misa, so then you have to say it has the weight to be matarit midin avela. You found Hakamarke for Shchitas Kachma Chutz that it doesn't have a din avela, like we just said. But Shchitas Pnim, how about the Shechting Pnim instead of Malika, Menolan, from where do we know that it's not going to have a din avela? And the Gemara, Hayol Shavu, Dinam, Shavu, Bifnim Kivachutz, since the din is not equal. But Chutz Yechayiv Karis, if he shechts the oif outside the Hazara, he's chayv kares. Ubefnim, he's not. And therefore, we had the hekesh of nevela to treifa to be memayit metumas nevela. That's what he was saying. Since shchitas kach mechutz is not metama, so since it helps it to be mechayiv kares, like the Svara of Rava, it has to help him be metayim from Tuma. So you have to say even shchitas kachim bifnim is not going to be metama, because if you're going to be metama, then you're not going to have the bifnim and bechutz equal like by treifa. And we learned the Vela has a din like treifa, so automatically it's not going to be metama basically in order that it should be shavu. So the Gemara is on this cloud that the Braise dashens that the Vela safe term is metama bebeis habliya. Only if it was on the Vela before and be'oifen that it will be bifnim and mechutz equal like treifa for the Gemara yachi. If so, malak kach machutz namiloi of the one who did malika of kachim outside the Azari shouldn't be metama beisabli the loishav bifnim kibachuz. If he did malika of kachim outside the Azara, it shouldn't be metama beis habliya. We're talking about malika. The loishav bifnim kibachuz shalei malika bifnim is kosher, ubachutz is not kosher. So why did we learn in the Mishnah, the previous Mishnah in Baraisa, that if kachim shamok b'chutz is metama beis habliya? It should not be. And for the Gemara, I'm going to have Simba Avashi, Danan, Davash, Leibach, Shredder, and Davash, Leibach, Shredder. You could only learn something that wasn't like Shchitas Oif Kachim. We're talking about Shchita. So Shchitas Oif Kachim, Bifnim, which is something that's not kosher. Also from something else that's not kosher. Medava, Shaleibach, Shredder, meaning like Shchitas Oif Kachim Bachutz. Both the Oif is possible. But but you cannot learn out something that's not kosher, like Malika said, kosher bachutz, from something that's kosher, like Malikas, if he does Malikas, the normal way of shechting the animals through the Malika way, with the nail, Malikas kosher b'fnim, where there it's the kosher way. You can't learn out something that's not kosher with something that's kosher. You can only learn out something that is not kosher from another thing that's not kosher. Okay, in fact, we don't learn out something that's not kosher from something that is the derech to be kosher. Tanya, we learned in the Braisa. How do we know say something that became possible by being taken out of the Azara, like the fats of the kabbanis or the limbs of the Eilah, that became possible by taking it outside the Azara. Sheim Allah lo yeda, that we know if it was placed on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. Sharei, for we find yoytze kasha, that. So he says, how do we know that? Because from the bama, yoytze kasha bama, that yoytze, somebody took it out of where there was no mechitzas by bama. It was in the field. So there was even mutal lechatchila. So we say something that was mutal lechatchila by bama, which was kosher by bama. So, but the Eved, if there was a psul in the Mikdash, if he took it out outside the Azara, lo yedei. So here you're learning something which is not the derech of being kosher from something that's kosher lechatchila. So the Gemara, and the Gemara Tana, we just learned we didn't learn it out from bama. That if he took out Yotze, meaning if he took out the Varim or the Emudav outside the Azara, that it's possible, we learn out from Zeis Teresa, and if it goes on to Mizbeach Layedet, we didn't learn out from Bama, we learned out from Zeis Teresa Eilah. That tells us something, Teresa Eilah is one din that in Allah Layedet. The Zeis is Memayit, only such a thing that had Kedusha and then became possible. And the Bama is just an asmachta, but we don't learn out from Bama. Sagt die Mishnah Malak, if the Kohen did a Malika with him says treif, and he opened up the chicken, he finds that it was treif. It doesn't become tummy by swallowing a beis habliya. It is metame beis habliya like an avela seif Tar, because Malikas Eif Kachim Treifa is not Metar Midei Nevela. Abba Rab Meir said, the market to his shita is, we just said that Rab Meir says it's not Metar Midei Sabliya. He says, Hakava Chayma, in Ivlas Behema, that its tumor is much more Chamo, because Metar Magam Masa, it becomes tummy by just touching it. By behema shchitasa metaheres, and the shchita is metaheres, the treifas mitumasa, the treifa from its tuma nivlasayif, which is much lighter tuma. Sheina metame magamasa. It's not metame by touching it or carrying it. In addition to hey shchitas metaheres as treifas mitumasa, for sure it should be metaret this treifa from its tuma. And now just like Matzina b'shchita by the shchita of Oif Chulin, shehi machshat l'achila by Oif Chulin, if you shacht it, it's machshat to eat it. Umataheres teifas metumase, and it's metar the treifa from its tuma. So once you're ready, no by shchita afli kasei by Oif Kachim, which is the one that shehi machshat l'achila, which is machshat to eat, to tar teifas metumase. So it should be metar the treifa from its tuma. A third opinion is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, since we learned the din of the Nevel Sa'id from the Nevel Behema, Daya we learned the din, Dayalav Minadin, the leaves cannot, Kiniblas Behema. It can only be similar to Niblas Behema. What Shchitasim Metahar Asa, only about Shchita you can learn out, by Shchita Oif Chulin, just like by Shchita Behema, it helps to be Metahar from being Tumas Nevela. There's no Malika by Behema. So you cannot make the comparison of Malikas Oif to Shchita's Oif, because the whole Makkah is from Behema, and by Behema there's no din of Malika. So who says Malikas Oif is Metar Asay? Rabbi Meir says that the Malikas Oif is Metar, like Darish Daya. He doesn't dash, and doesn't he dash and Daya? How could he say it's Metar, that by Behema there's no Malika? Well, Daya Daraisa, and we know Daya Laban Adin is Daraisa. The Tanya that we learned in Abraisa that explains the midah of Kavachema, Midin Kavachema Ketzad, in which Oifen do we dash in a Kavachema? So he says, he brings the raya from the story of Miriam. It says, Vayim Hashem al-Mish v'aviyah Yorek b'fanah. If her father would have spit in her face, wouldn't she be embarrassed? Halaiti kalein. She was young, wouldn't she be embarrassed for 7 days? So, l'cheira, the words Halaiti kalein Shivas Yamim is a lashon tmiyah of a Kavachema, because if her father shows and spits in her face, l'cheira, this is a Kavachema l'nazifa shel Shechina. How much more so by the Shechina giving her something that is embarrassing, this tzaras, should have been much stronger than a father spitting in the face. It should have been 14 days. The Rabbeinu Tam explains why by the Shekhinah it should be 14 days. So he brings down from the Gemara, neither it says that there are 3 shutman in Adam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the father and the mother. The father and the mother give 5 things, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives 10 things. So if the father gives 5 things and spits in the daughter's face, she would have been embarrassed for 7 days. The Shekhinah, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is double, in Shutvis, in creating a person for sure, it should have been 14 days. Only what do we learn out? That we cannot do more than the Nidai. That's all the pasuk speaks about. The Tikkalas, that Halay Tikkalas Shivas Yamim. We can't go more than that. That's why she's closed for 7 days. So how could Rabbeinu say we learn out Malika if the source of the Kavachema is by Behema where there's no Malika? How could you learn out from Malika's Matar? Rabbeinu Kra Ashkach LeKadosh. Rabbeinu found a pasuk, found a different pasuk from which he dashed. It says the Torah compares Behema to Eiv. Where do we find the Behema is similar to Eiv and Eiv to Behema? It's a different. By when it comes to Tumas Nevela, we don't find that they're similar. Behema, to just touching or carrying it, one becomes tameh. Eif is only when he swallows it by achila. Eif when he swallows it in his throat, it's metame de begadim. Behema doesn't become tameh beis habliya. So where is the comparison? Only to tell you, ma behema, just like behema, the thing that's masher to eat is matar the treifa from its tumah. So too, something that's masher is matar the treifa from its tumah. That's where you learned it out. Rabbi Yehuda, who says that shchita seif chulin treifa u'melika seif kachim treifa is not matar midday nevela. My time. What's the reason? Kra ashken chadarash. He too found the pasuk and Hidashim where it says in the pasuk nevela utreifa. It says Chol Nashon Asher Teichel nevela utreifa. So what's the treifa? Rabbi Yehuda treifa lamanam. What do I have to? Why does the pasuk have to mention treifa in this pasuk? If it's talking about a treifa that died without shchita, mimanavshach im treifa chaya. If the treifa could still live and it has a din like it's living, and you wait till it actually dies, and only after its death it's metama. So if it's only after its death, hadei nevela amura. You already said, you mentioned nevela. Im treifa eina chaya, and if you're going to say that treifa cannot live, it's going to die right away, hadei b'chlal nevela, then it's included in nevela. Although you have to say, you have to say it's coming to include a treifa that they shachted it still could live, and nevertheless it's still metama. And so, but he's coming to tell you that the shchita, if he did a shchita, it's gonna remove the tumah. It's not gonna have a din tumah. Okay, so it's come to tell you that the shchita lahavi tev sheshchata shematama. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the shchita will not help to tell you that even though it could live and he shachs it, it's still going to be metameh. Meaning that the shchita is not like a mikveh that it could be metar mituma that already was chal. So the only time that it could be makshe the eif, if it's not a treifa, but if it's a treifa, it's not going to help. Okay. Meaning since it was already a treifa, it became tummy right then.